Hello and welcome to this time-lapse video and tutorial. This tutorial I'm calling Drawing Controversy, and I'm going to be talking about two areas that I think are a little bit controversial. One has to do with drawing and the other has to do with tracing. So please hang on as we get to both of those. To begin with, I'm going to talk about the importance of drawing and a little bit of how to get there. I have a lot of followers, subscribers, and artists that I look at their work all the time. I'm usually looking at their paintings, but when there are flaws in the paintings, it's usually because there's a lack of drawing skill. And if people want to know how to become a better painter, it seems to me what you really need to know is how do you become a better drawer. And I have some very strong opinions on this, so I hope I don't get myself into too much trouble by saying things that might be considered controversial, although it's a little hard to say how, with all the things going on in the world, how drawing can be considered controversial. So a little bit of my background. From very young, I was interested in art and would keep sketchbooks all the time and would draw all the time. But drawing all the time does not always equate to good drawing skill. And here's where some people's opinion may vary with mine. I am not sure how you develop those good drawing skills without getting some level of formalized drawing training. There is just so much to know. There's a part of drawing which is copying the two-dimensional shapes. When you're copying a photograph, or you're drawing from life, or you're doing a master copy, which I'll talk about a little bit later. There's a part of it that's the skill in copying what is there in two-dimensional space. Essentially, what are the shapes that you see, and copying those as with highest fidelity as possible. And the more you do that, the higher ability you'll have to do that. That's just one component of drawing. The other component of drawing is taking those two-dimensional shapes, but also be mindful of the volume that they represent in space, and using all the ideas of foreshortening and perspective and shading, accentuation of accent marks which help lead your eyes around a form. All of those things come together to give the drawing volume. And those ideas are complex enough that I'm not sure that people would generally arrive on them on their own. And this is where I say you would need some formalized training. People who have the knowledge how to do this, to have exposure to those ideas. And what I think is, because I've went through this, is that I spent a year of drawing in an environment around other people and around this information. A minimum of a year. I went to see really growth in my drawing. I spent a full year of at least drawing 30 hours a week to see a significant improvement of my drawing and enough of an understanding of what my skill level was and what other things I still needed to learn or perfect or to improve upon to continue to get my drawing to a higher and higher level. Now, I feel that my drawing skill is still okay, and if I set about doing a drawing as a finished piece of artwork, I have a very tough time with that. There's other people that I know that do spectacular drawings. When you look at their drawing, the finished work is a finished work of art. And I can't necessarily say that about my drawing. I do some charcoal drawing where I spend a lot of time, but I'm really treating the charcoal and the paper more as a painting medium than a drawing medium. And so when I talk about drawing, I'm also talking about paintings. For example, this time-lapse video is of Remy, a young woman. I got her image off of the app Sktchy, which I've mentioned before. When I did this painting, this is one of those few paintings that came together very quickly. I just did light demarcation and paint to sort of get the placement of my form, and I jumped right in to the finished painting. And this is one of those cases where it comes together so well that the challenge then to the painting is how not to mess it up and to make very careful finishing marks, and then also not to overpaint it. And so I would say that I maybe spent 2 to 3 hours on this painting, but really the last hour was very carefully making some finishing marks. So, but that gets me back to my point, is that I wouldn't have been able to do this painting without the underlying drawing skills. And so for anyone who wants to really learn how to draw and paint to the level that I do it, or the level they see other artists doing it, my biggest recommendation is that you find that community of artists that are drawing to the level that you want to draw in a formal learning environment. Now, most places in the world there will be a critical mass of artists that you are able to find workshops, drawing workshops, art schools. Even if you don't want to become a full-time student, there are generally open drawing classes from life, which is another aspect of drawing from the nude figure, and which is a huge challenge. Don't get me wrong, that is one of the hardest things in the world, is to draw from live from a nude figure. But now there is also many opportunities to use the internet to learn to draw through drawing workshops that are online, that have tutorials online. A couple that I can name is the Watts Atelier that's online. There's an online channel called Proko. And on Proko, they have lots of drawing tutorials on there, which are free, but there's others that cost money to attend, or if you can find a school in your area. But what I'm saying is it requires the dedication to spend close to full time in this endeavor of learning how to draw, and as part of pursuing an art career. And it's just like any other career where you have to learn the basics and spend the time doing it to be able to get to a high enough level that it brings your whole work to a higher level. So what's controversial about that is I'm sure that some people will say, no, you can just train yourself, you can just learn yourself, and there are things that you can do on your own that will improve your ability, but I also think that there are certain key information that you're not going to learn in a vacuum. And now, of course, with the internet, you have so many more resources to be able to find some of that information about perspective and foreshortening, etc., and how to create a 3D looking image. I can remember one of my teachers, a lovely man named Vern Wilson. When I went to Art Center, he was one of the Art Center teachers, but unfortunately I never got to take one of his classes, but I knew enough about his work that I still wanted to train with him, so I took his workshops on weekends. And you have to remember, I was going to school full-time. A lot of that was drawing classes. They would have open workshops at Art Center between the day classes and the night classes that would last a couple hours. So I was doing drawing in those couple hours. And then on the weekend, I was going to a full day drawing session at Vern Wilson's workshops. And one thing I remember very distinctly from his workshop is that he opened up a book of a master drawing. And that's one way of training, is to redraw master drawings. But I remember he was drawing a torso, and he put down a few very faint lines to demark where the torso was in space. And then he drew an accented contour of that torso with a few marks along the interior of the torso, and the whole torso went from being flat to popping out into space. Perfect volume. The man's chest, you could no longer see it as a flat piece of paper. And I was just staring at that, astonished, because there was just so few marks on the paper, just a very well-placed accented contour that led the eye around the form that forced it to see it as a 3D volume. And from that point, I realized that I had to learn how to do that. And I'm not sure I ever really learned to that level, but just that idea, I knew that there was so much more there than met the eye, and really took a higher level of training. So what I would say is find people that inspire you when you look at their drawings that do that to the same level, and pursue them as teachers of what they were doing. I mentioned another way to learn is to do master drawings or copies of master drawings. This is one of the fastest ways to improve your skills, but like I said, within a formalized drawing setting. But if you can keep a sketchbook and find drawings from the library or online that you can do copies of, it's not just the same as doing a copy from a photograph, because photographs are tricky in that photographs tend to very subtly give you clues about the 3D form, whereas master drawings, each mark is a clue of what the artist was thinking in terms of creating a three-dimensional form. So that's one way, but I would say definitely find a formalized training environment. So the other part of what I wanted to talk about, which I think some might find controversial, is that number one, I'd like to say that I think tracing is an important tool and has its place. And when I say tracing, I don't mean doing a high-level drawing, which may be done at like the Florence Academy, where they do a very high-level drawing first and they transfer or trace that onto a canvas. What I'm talking about is using tools to trace a photograph onto a canvas or a photograph onto a panel and then do a painting from that. And technically this is more or less how Vermeer painted. When he did those paintings at the time, there were no such things as photographs. So what he was doing a tracing of was a tracing of life. He would set up his studio to look just exactly the way he wanted to paint it, and he used tools to trace that scene directly onto the canvas, or to paint directly on the canvas from that scene. And I would say that if your interest is in photorealism, that the only true way to get there is to do a fair amount of tracing from the photographs. A lot of artists now are working very large scale, and they must, as a necessity, if you want a good outcome, you have to do a tracing first from that photograph. That said, I think that there's some areas where tracing is fine. I find a different problem, and this is artists. Some are actually in the same space I am on YouTube, doing alla prima painting or doing time-lapse painting from photographs, and they start off with a tracing on a board, which again I have no problem with. But what I do have problems with is that they have tutorials about how to paint and how to paint like they do, but they clearly seem to hide the fact that they start off with a traced photo. And I think it's a disservice to people who are trying to learn how to paint like they paint, is to hide the fact that they are actually tracing. I try to make sure that, when I look at it, I can tell that it's traced, because you see the type of drawing that's on the board only comes from a tracing of a photograph. It looks much different than the attempt to draw from a photograph. And when you see people in their comments, they ask, how did you get the drawing, or how was the drawing produced? Did you trace it? There's no answer. You can look at hundreds of time-lapse videos and their tutorial videos, and there's no mention of how they actually get the drawing onto the board. So I think, in my mind, I think that really is a disservice, and I have a problem with that. Hey, if you trace, just say that that's what you do. The one problem, however, with tracing is that it could also become a crutch where your drawing skills become atrophied, or you don't really develop true drawing skills. What you do is develop a skill to fill in color and value within specific trace shapes. In my mind, this is a more advanced version of coloring by numbers, and some take it to a high enough level that you could say that that's an art form in itself, such as photorealism. But when you're just filling in those shapes, then you're losing those ideas, those skills about foreshortening and perspective and accentuated contours that give those forms volume that you're never really learning. And so that comes out in the finished painting. There's a lack of sense of volume to those paintings, because all of those ideas, including ideas of soft and hard edges and textures to bring parts of the form forward. All of those ideas are being lost because the artist in a way is stunting their growth by depending so heavily on the tracing. So there, I said it. I hope I haven't said anything too controversial. Maybe some of you wholeheartedly agree with me. Maybe some artists out there who do a fair amount of tracing feel that I've gotten it all wrong. But either way, please let me know. I'd love to hear your comments and get some feedback from you about this question about drawing versus tracing, or how you go about learning to draw, whether in my mind you really need to get some level of formalized training to really become a proficient drawer, or maybe there's ways that I'm missing of how to get there. But in my mind, it's sort of like Malcolm Gladwell's book about outliers, is that it requires those 10,000 hours of doing something with a keen focus and being motivated to learn those skills. That those 10,000 hours is what's needed to become excellent at that craft. And drawing is a true craft. It's the underlying craft of painting, and painting is a craft in itself also. I've had to learn how to draw, and then I had to learn how to paint, and I'm still learning how to do both. So thank you for listening to this time-lapse tutorial, and please give me a thumbs up, leave a comment, and subscribe if you want to hear more like this, and hit the notifications bell if you'd like to be notified when I post a new video. Thank you very much.